Tonight we're embarking in East London, and welcome to Question Time. Good evening to you at home. Good evening to our audience here. We're going to put the questions to our panel who don't know them until they hear them from their lips. On the panel, a Conservative former Deputy Prime Minister Michael Heseltine, who was Defence Secretary during the Cold War, Labour's Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Rachel Reeves, the Liberal Democrat Simon Hughes, who became a Justice Minister in December, the Times columnist David Aaronovitch, the former Kremlin advisor Alexander Nekrasov, and the Daily Mail columnist Amanda Platel. Thanks very much. Thank you very much indeed. Our first question's from Eddie McAnally, please.
Is Russia too powerful, unpredictable and scary for Europe to deal with it in the way that it's dealt with other countries in the past?
Is Russia too unpredictable, big and scary to be dealt with in the way that Europe has dealt with other countries? Michael Heseltine.
You can't possibly underestimate the risks and dangers in the Ukraine in recent events. It's unpredictable. And if there's one thing that is necessary, it is to lower the temperature and to try and resolve this matter by dialogue. I don't think anyone knows how it will be resolved. How can I, as I'm not Ukrainian, I've never been there, how can I know how the thing will play out? But there is one thought that I would contribute to the answer to this question. I think that in the West, we need to reappraise our relationships with Russia. You see, if I look forward over the next 20, 30 years, the big problems, dangers I see for our part of the world, let's assume China were to become a belligerent world power. I don't think it will, but suppose it was. I would want Russia on our side. If you look at the southern borders of Russia, they are full of unstable, very ethnically divided countries, endless difficulties. And surely we ought to have a degree of humility with the idea that military intervention or something of that sort is going to solve anything. If you take Iraq, Afghanistan, you take Libya, it's quite obvious that there are potential civil wars going on in those countries which our intervention has done nothing to solve. Russian intervention, however illegal, however questionable, in the Ukraine, has actually created a position where bloodshed is not likely to flow within the country itself. And so I am frightened of the language which tries to push Russia ever more remote, with bits of the Ukraine being attracted into the European Union, other bits of the Ukraine wanting to join the Russia itself. You saw the result of the Ukrainian parliament today. And the diplomacy, I think, for the West, for Europe particularly, is to reach out to Russia for some all-embracing, almost certainly economic settlement, which makes Russia feel secure. Never forget.
Whose language are you objecting to?
Well, I think that the reaction of the Americans today of sanctions of the sort that they've imposed now is presumptuous.
And the British government?
The British government is involved in European talks. But the last point I wanted to make about the Russians, never forget that it was Napoleon who came from France and Hitler who came from Germany. And every Russian knows that.
David Aaronovitch.
That would be a completely appropriate response if anybody had even remotely suggested invading Russia. Nobody has. But let's just think about how the game's changed today. And remember before, as we do, that we stand guarantors under a 1994 agreement to the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And that means plus the Crimea. Today, the coup people who took over in the Crimea, when people stormed the parliament there, brought forward a referendum that was supposed to be that they themselves had said would be held on autonomy for Crimea on the 30th of March to the 16th of March. 10 days away from now. On the same day, two Ukrainian TV stations were closed down and two pro-Putin, pro-Kremlin TV stations opened up in their stead.
That's a description, but the question is Russia too big and scary to be dealt with in the way that Europe deals with other issues?
It certainly is far too big and scary to be dealt with in the way that Lord Heseltine is suggesting, for this reason. The leader of the Crimean pro-Russian group said, when he was asked what he expected to happen as a result of this referendum, was 75% will vote yes. This is a de facto annexation of the territory of a sovereign country with the agreement and with the connivance of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin, that we stand guarantor to the state, having suggested that we would stop it somehow from happening. Now, we can't solve this by invasion, but we certainly, sure as hell, have a responsibility to the Ukrainians not to turn around and say, well, in some 100 years' time, we might need you against the Chinese, so we're going to turn a blind eye to the fact that you've gone in and taken a big chunk of somebody else's country. Now, actually, I do have some thoughts about how it should be dealt with, and Ed Miliband and David Cameron have talked about some. We can talk about some of them later. But the one thing that we're not going to be able to do is simply say, oh, Vladimir Putin, you know, well, you're a Russian, this is what we expect from Russians, and we don't care that much, we're just going to let it happen.
Yeah,
Alexander Nekrasov. You can come back on what he's saying. Alexander Nekrasov.
Well, let's turn this question around. Can Russia trust the West? Now, when the Cold War stopped, we Russians, our government, was assured by the West it's not going to push NATO border to the east. We were assured definitely. Look what happened afterwards. NATO started to spread closer and closer to Russia. And this was not a sort of a friendly intent. Why? If the Cold War was over, NATO wanted to be closer to Russia. We don't understand that. Secondly, we are missing the point here, that it was a coup in Kiev which was supported by the EU. And let's not close our eyes to that, because EU politicians involved themselves in the so-called protests. They came over, they encouraged those protests. Now we know they were funded by the EU and the Americans. So to say that President Putin suddenly decided to invade Crimea for no reason.
Alexander, are you saying that Europe organised those protests and Europe effectively led to the downfall of the corrupt President Yanukovych?
No, excuse me. He was a democratically elected president, and that was confirmed by the European Union observers and other observers, right?
Of course.
So to say that he was a corrupt... I can name you several more countries.
I'm sure you could. I'm sure you come from one.
Yes, and I can even say to you that President Hollande is less popular than Yanukovych was. But we're not saying, oh, come on, French people, get rid of him. The point here is this. When Ukraine refused to sign a free association agreement with the EU, which was a bad agreement, believe me, I read it, any sane government would have said no to this agreement. The Russian deal was better. There was money on the table. Excuse me, but there was money on the table, because Ukraine would not have survived with 800 million euros, which was promised by the EU, right? And suddenly, Yanukovych, in a matter of days, became illegal, corrupt, and everything. Before the signing of that agreement, before it was still on the table, he was okay for the European Union. He was okay.
All right. We get the point. You, sir, in the second row. We'll come back to the argument. Yes.
I really do think Alexander's got a point. Can Russia trust the West? Because the way I sort of see it is, I know I ain't condone what Russia's done at all in this situation, but where are the West getting this presumption we have the right to sanction Russia for breaching international law when we participated in an illegal invasion of Iraq?
All right, Amanda Patel. Hold on, David. Amanda Patel. You heard the point he made. How can Russia trust the West?
And I totally agree with you. I think that Tony Blair's legacy was that we have lost the moral authority to go into other countries. You look at the mess in Afghanistan, the mess in Iraq, and the last thing, I actually think David Cameron has judged this right. We do not want to see another British soldier, man or woman, with their boots on foreign soils trying to sort out someone else's problems and coming up back with their legs together. And if if I just may answer, was it Eddie who, with the original question? You know, the thing that struck me about this whole dilemma at the moment, we have just announced that our defence budget has been so cut that it's unlikely we could defend our own country. Germany's has been cut, France's has been cut, and America announced last week that they will now have, in their next plan, they'll have fewer troops than they had in pre-Second World War. How can we stand up to countries like Russia, who've increased their budgets, and they've just announced that they've got a long, one of these big missiles that can, you know, nuke us? You know, it's like an ant biting on an alligator.
So what should you do? Nothing?
I think what David Cameron is doing is absolutely right. He's trying to negotiate his way out of it. He's trying to bring, you know, a qualified conversation between Russia and Ukraine and the people there, and not threaten them with violence from Europe, which is the last thing they need.
You said in the centre there.
Some very interesting points raised there. One concern I think that we need to establish even beyond this current crisis is that probably the two most damaging events of the last century were the two world wars. And NATO's agreements itself create the same kind of crises that permitted the First World War. You know, the Serbs killed Franz Ferdinand. There was all these cross agreements that enabled the First World War. And where we sit right now, the Ukraine was inches from signing an agreement where it became part of NATO and where we would therefore have been forced into a situation that would be extremely damaging. And I think we just need to...
Sorry. There are some extraordinary things going on here. Firstly, no one has suggested any use of military force against Russia. That would be completely mad. Secondly, nobody's suggesting Ukraine comes into NATO. The EU agreement was an association agreement with the European Union, which, incidentally, as far as we can tell, the majority of Ukrainian people actually seem to have wanted, but which the President, after discussions with President Putin, I wonder what went on there, actually decided at the last moment that he wasn't going to sign and set off the crisis. The EU didn't set off the crisis, Yanukovych set off the crisis, and Putin is now trying to take advantage of it.
Excuse me, David, but let me tell you about the conversation between Catherine Ashton and the Estonian foreign minister.
The European foreign minister.
Yeah. Estonian foreign minister, who told her that the information points to those snipers who were shooting.
No, he didn't say that.
No, he did say that. No, it was confirmed. Actually, let me finish. This was confirmed by the Estonian foreign ministry.
No,
so
he didn't confirm that.
Sorry, just make clear what it is you're asserting.
No, the point is this. Suddenly we learn that the snipers who were shooting both at the police and the protesters were hired by the opposition.
No, we didn't.
No, yes, it did.
No, we did
not.
No,
excuse me, you should read the text.
This is completely...
No, this is very important, because that betrays...
Look, it's no use getting into the minutiae, who said what, who shot what. Exactly. This is a vitally important political issue of massive scale. And where I take issue with David, he says we've guaranteed this frontier. Now, that's terrific. We can all march to the banners, but actually you can't do anything. And so you're deceiving your audience.
I think you were in that government, Michael. I think you were in the Conservative government that made that guarantee.
This whole issue is full of quotations of who said what. The issue is this. The Russians are there, and we, you say, have guaranteed the frontier. I don't disagree with you. What are you going to do about it? You're not going to send troops. You've made that absolutely clear. Are you going to have economic sanctions?
Yes.
There's no chance. There is no chance of the Germans agreeing to economic sanctions because they will suffer more than the Russians, because they depend on Russia for their energy supply.
All right. Yes, sir. Yes.
Personally, I think the UK needs to wake up a little here. You know, we need to play our role on a global scale as toning down the rhetoric from the US, bridge the gap between the US and the EU and Russia.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bigger picture going on here. Right. Not only are we disagreeing about Ukraine, but while the Syrian conflict goes on, and let's bear in mind that Russia supports President Assad, there's already an element of distrust there. We need to play a more mediator or mediatorial role in this. You know, we need to open the talks. We need to get Russia back on side. You know, I don't agree with what they've done, but, you know, we can't go wading into this pretending we're a big authority on it. We're not, and we rely on the gas from Russia.
What would your view be if they have this vote in Crimea and it votes to go with Russia and leave Ukraine?
if it can be overseen and properly, well, if it can be, and if they allow the EU in to make sure that the vote is fair, and that's the way they vote.
All right, then it would be a closed issue for you. You say at the back in the second row. Come to you, Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with David Aaronovitch there. I mean, where is the moral imperative to this, you know? I mean, when are we going to stand up for a country that wants democracy? I mean, is this not akin to Germany going into Poland, you know, the first steps of that? And is not the actions of Vladimir Putin just totalitarian and dictatorial?
But
all of what he's done is unjust. Does anybody care about that any longer?
When you talk about the morality, what do you think's happening in Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya, all of which were used to justify the argument we will set up stable democratic governments? Look at what's happening there.
All right. Rachel Reeves. Hang on. You can come back at it, but let Rachel Reeves answer your point.
Yeah. Well, actually, going back to the first question as well from Eddie, look, I think that there is common ground that can be found, and others have said this already, but I think it is worth repeating. We need to lower the temperature to de-escalate and get the Ukrainians and the Russians talking to each other, because that's the only way we're going to find a solution. Of course, there's a role for Britain and the EU and America, but there's only really going to be an answer if the Ukrainians and Russians talk to each other.
That's correct.
Now, there are, of course, things we can do, and no one is suggesting military action. And, you know, that sort of language, I think, is sabre-rattling. It's not going to help anybody. But there are targeted things that can be done. For example, visa restrictions, asset freezing. I'm not suggesting that they need to be done right now, but there are options on the table which are short of sanctions and certainly short of military action. And I do think that common ground can be found, but we need that common ground to be found.
It feels like it's not the first time Russia's done it, and it might be Ukraine now, but it might be another one of the former USSR states in another 10 years. And the last time that they did go into one of the former countries, they devastated it. They really, really did. So when are we going to actually turn around and start helping these people who are asking for help and stop helping people who aren't wanting help?
And the best way to help is to get people sat round the table with each other, which is not happening now. And there's an important role for Britain and the EU.
Does that work for you?
Well, they didn't listen the first time round.
It's the only thing that will work.
What do you think? I'm sorry, I said I'd come back to you at the back.
I agree with Rachel Reeves and a lot of people. There needs to be dialogue and a way forward, but even though I have a lot of respect for you, Michael Heseltine, you know, I get tired of this thing about Iraq and Afghanistan being wheeled out as examples of how the West has meddled in other countries' affairs. These are very different scenarios. You know, there are a lot of precedents about this agreements that were made before, the fact that NATO, all these countries around are part of NATO. If a country wants democracy, you know, it should be upheld by countries like this.
OK, Simon Hughes, do you want to answer that point?
It should be upheld by countries like this, but can I link that with the initial question? Is Russia big? Yes. Is it unpredictable? Yes, in some respects, in terms of how it pursues its ambitions. And is it scary? Certainly when its troops, pretending not to be its troops, appear in other countries, that's pretty scary. But we have to be a bit careful. In my constituency, just by the Imperial War Museum, there is a memorial to the Soviet war dead at the end of the Second World War. 25 million people. They were our allies. Without them, we would not have won the Second World War. The Arctic convoys, who we salute, were part of that wonderful rescue operation. It is ironic in a way that it was in Crimea, in Yalta, where the settlement post-war was resolved in 1945.
Where does this get us with today?
Well, where it gets us is that we have to be sensitive to Russian history while we absolutely uphold the right of the Ukrainian people to their independence, to their own decision-making. And Alexander's wrong about what happened in the last few weeks. There was a deal done for a coalition agreement. The president then left within 24 hours. The parliament decided what should happen. The parliament elected an interim president. And Dave is absolutely right. There is a guarantee of which we're signatories that Ukraine should not be invaded. We're signatories of that in return for them giving up nuclear weapons. And there's an absolute guarantee that Crimea is part of Ukraine. We need, as Rachel says, and there's a consensus across Parliament among the major parties, to encourage European Union to work together. We have slightly different interests, but we must work together. We have to use those appropriate sanctions and methods which are political and which give the message to Russia. But if the Ukrainians, I've been there several times, and I love the country and the people, if the Ukrainians can't look to us at moments like this to stand up for the liberties to determine their own future, then we're not just denying our obligation to them in law, we're actually failing to stand up for standards that should be European and that Russia needs to respect as well.
But if the Crimea... If Crimea chooses to leave Ukraine, then there's nothing you can do about it, despite these agreements and guarantees and all these things.
Well, hang on a minute. It's slightly more complicated. Ukraine has done this before. There's been a vote since 1954 when Crimea was given to Ukraine. There's already been one occasion when there was a vote by the a referendum, a so-called referendum.
No, Simon, there was never a referendum.
There
Sorry.
was.
No, you can't say that. No, there was never a referendum.
I do say that, and I'm also clear that the Parliament in Crimea has made decisions, as it were, to break away. I think the issue is not now whether we allow suddenly, in the middle of all this turmoil, Crimea to break away. We need to, as Rachel rightly said, seek to get the Russians and the Ukrainians around the table. 30% of people in Ukraine are Russian-speaking, first language. They need to come around the table, supported by the rest of the European Union. Can I just say one last thing? The economic future of Russia, as well as Ukraine, depends on a peaceful outcome. Russia's economy is not in good nick. Ukraine's economy is not in good nick. They could be very strong economically. They could help themselves and us. But we absolutely are going the wrong way if we allow things to go on as they are.
We've got hands up, and we've had a lot of talk about what the EU and Britain might do economically, sanctions and all that. So I want to take a question from Swamit Mehta, please, on this point, and we'll just carry on with this because it's very, very interesting.
I question how credible the threats of economic sanctions on Russia actually are, given that it supplies 30% of Europe's gas.
It's a point that Michael Heseltine made. But how credible are the threats of sanctions, or indeed of any action, David?
Firstly, Russia is a great deal more open to economic sanctions than, say, the Soviet Union was. I mean, all these arguments used to be deployed at the time of the Soviet Union, so you couldn't do anything about Hungary or Czechoslovakia. And it was true, because Russia was not part of the world economy. Now it is. And actually, it's a pretty vulnerable part of the world economy. That's why its oligarchs come and live over here, buy our football clubs, buy up large sections of London, etc., use this place as a place to launder money, large amounts of it that was stolen in Russia, effectively by stealing the assets of the Russian people. And the question is whether we are going to be effectively corrupted by that money into saying that we're not prepared to take any kind of economic hit, should in 10 days' time, this is the point, in 10 days' time that rigged vote will happen, and in 10 days' time, effectively, there will be a de facto annexation of Crimea, unless we show in these next 10 days that we are prepared to do something about it. I agree about the business about talking people down and getting people to talk, but it can't be on the basis that effectively we say, yeah, we're happy with the annexation.
Michael Heseltine.
I would never say I was happy. I just listened to hear what you think we should do. And we're not going to impose sanctions on Russia because we won't get agreement to do it. And what no one is talking about is whether sanctions on Russia might lead to sanctions on us from Russia and the cost in British economic terms that would flow from that.
If we could get agreement, Michael, would you be in favour of it?
If we could get agreement...
With European partners?
With European partners to talk to Russia and the Ukraine, yes. But what I would not do is to rush to the point at which Russia is forced onto the defensive. You know, I think you said it, or the question earlier, are they unpredictable? They're not unpredictable. These are the most sophisticated chess players in the world. And what they do is to back their own self-interests vehemently. But they calculate. And I remember vividly as Defence Secretary facing the dangers of nuclear holocaust. The only real danger was a mistake. The Russians would never have precipitated a nuclear war, because they could never have won such a war.
OK, you say in the fourth row.
I just think that it's very telling that when there are economic interests of the EU and of America and of Russia involved, that the whole international community is absolutely concerned. When it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, who has seen a massive crisis in terms of workers' protests and government attacking those protesters and police attacking those protesters, the international community has been silent, completely silent. I think it's atrocious.
But Are you saying economic interest, self-interest?
Self-interest,
dominates?
completely, yeah.
Amanda Patel, you'd agree with that?
Well, I can't see in a million years that we're going to implement any sanctions in this situation when we have to get the agreement of Germany, when they rely upon 40% of their energy from Russia. It's just not going to happen. There's not going to be an agreement.
Next week.
And, sorry?
It will happen next week, Amanda.
What will happen?
If the Russian and the pro-Russians in Crimea insist on going ahead with this referendum and rig it, there will be economic sanctions of some kind or another, because we will have no alternative.
David, you use the word "and rig it." Now, can I ask you a simple question? 81 out of the 83 members of the Crimean Parliament today voted for such a referendum. How can you say with certainty that it will be rigged? Or is that what you want to say after it happens?
No, I can't say. I can't say with certainty.
But you did say.
I can't say with 100% certainty.
You did say.
I can say with
95%
likelihood.
Well, come off it.
No, that it's going to be rigged. Well, that's not good enough for you.
Simon Hughes, you're in the government. You're the only person here who is in the government. What do you make of that bit of paper we saw being carried in or out of Downing Street saying, actually, we're not going to do anything at all?
Well, firstly, I don't think everybody saw the whole of the bit of paper, as I understand it.
Oh, did you see more than we saw?
No, but I've, as you would hope, taken advice as to what is being discussed. The reality is...
and you've taken advice on what was on that bit of paper?
No, I've talked to colleagues, obviously, to know what exactly...
What did it say?
Well, no, I don't... Given that it isn't a definitive position of the UK government, I don't think... Exactly what it said is helpful. The UK government has a very clear position set out by the Prime Minister today and yesterday and the day before, actually with the support of the Leader of the Opposition, and that is that we are taking action because to do nothing is unacceptable. And to respond to the questioner, they are intended to start with be targeted asset-related action to deal with people who've got money in this country who we can freeze and deal with in very targeted ways. Now, there are other things we can do. We've already said we're not proceeding with the preparations for the G8 summit, which is due to be in Russia, because they hold the chair. We've already said we're not going to support, sadly, from a political assessment, the Paralympics. Those sort of things. And can I just say to the gentleman who raised the question about Bosnia-Herzegovina, I had the privilege to be there 2 weeks ago. We absolutely have made clear to the government in that country that it's unacceptable for the authorities to turn on the public. I did so myself to the Prime Minister of the country on behalf of Her Majesty's government. We absolutely make clear to all countries in Europe, whatever the relationship inside or outside the EU, that, for example, oppression of minorities like gay people is unacceptable. We will go on doing that, but at the moment we need to concentrate on a collective agreement across the European Union with all our differences to try to make sure we have a common approach to say to Russia, stop, think, it's not in your interest, and it's certainly not in the interest of Ukraine.
And actually, we have done something. We have withdrawn Prince Edward's appearance at the Sochi Olympic Games. So we've come out fighting.
Can't work out whether that's a Republican or a monarchist opinion that you're right, as an Australian. Or perhaps you aren't an Australian anymore. Look, you can join in this debate, of course, at home. Text, Twitter, our hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981. Use the red button to see what other people are saying. I'm going to move on to a question now from Joel Hodgson, please.
Can the Met ever be trusted when it comes to dealing with ethnic minorities?
Can the Met ever be trusted when it comes to dealing with ethnic minorities? This is in the light of the Home Secretary's announcement today that there's going to have to be an inquiry into undercover policing after a review found what she called deeply troubling evidence that the police spied on the Stephen Lawrence family. And the question is, can the Met ever be trusted? Simon Hughes, you're a London MP. Do you think the Met can ever be trusted?
Well, the public in London need the Met to be trusted, but they haven't arrived. No, but they haven't arrived there. They should be trusted. And it's a tragedy that after the efforts made by the Labour government under Jack Straw to have the Macpherson inquiry, which we thought dealt with the Stephen Lawrence failed prosecutions, and lots of action by the Met to deal with those things, we now discover from today's report, independently commissioned by the government, very clear and robust decision of the Home Secretary, that they failed again. They failed to investigate corruption allegations. They failed to pass on those allegations to the Macpherson Committee. And the third allegation was that there was clearly inappropriate undercover activity. Dwayne Brooks, who was the friend of Stephen Lawrence, who's a colleague and friend of mine and is now in public life because he is seeking to be the mayor of the borough that Rachel originally came from, in Lewisham, I spoke today. He's a black man, a young black Londoner. And I take his advice because actually it's about young black minority and other Londoners. He said, look, we've got to get the message across the Met. You've got to move on. You have got to move on. It's no good looking back and trying to accuse people of things in the past. Yes, they need to be looked into. But the obligation on the Met and on the politicians in London is to make sure that every single citizen in Barking and Dagenham and everywhere else can have confidence in the police force. I'll tell you one thing that is needed. The police force needs to look like London. It needs to have the mix of ethnic backgrounds. Sorry?
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
So demolishing. Joel Hodgson asked the question. What's your opinion?
I don't think that they can be trusted. I think that it's just one mistake after another. It's every week you're opening a newspaper and it's always something else that's gone wrong. I mean, is it going to be in 25 years' time we're going to find out that Mark Duggan wasn't lawfully shot?
What do you think, Rachel Reeves? I'll come to you, sir.
Well, I totally understand what Joel is saying, and it shouldn't take 21 years for a mother to get justice and find out what happened to her son back in Eltham 21 years ago. But I would also say that the vast majority of police officers, like all of us, will be disgusted and distressed by what they've learnt today as well, because the majority of police officers, I think, in London but also in Leeds, where I'm an MP, I think do a fantastic job of protecting us, investigating crimes, rooting out homophobia and racism, and bringing people to justice for those crimes.
But how do you know when you're dealing? How do you know when you're dealing with the police, whether you're dealing with one of the people you describe, or whether you're dealing with somebody who, like the Home Secretary says, is damaged? Policing stands damaged today. How can you tell what you're dealing with?
Well, look, I just think the vast majority are doing a good job, and we need to ensure that the reforms that were recommended originally by Macpherson and then now with this new inquiry are taken forward, and that means reforming the Independent Police Complaints Commission, because this investigated in 2006 and didn't find out any of this, so that clearly needs further reform.
Okay.
And we also need to have greater scrutiny of undercover police officers, because that shouldn't have been allowed to happen the way it did with that infiltration of the family. So reform is needed. But I think that we should trust the police. I think we can trust the police. And I think the police, like us, will be disgusted by what they've learnt today.
You, sir.
I think it's unfortunate that the police cannot be trusted. They have made efforts, I think, to improve the service. But until we get rid of institutional racism, and unless we understand what institutional racism is all about, there will never be that trust. And I think that institutional racism exists throughout society, not just police.
OK. And you, sir, the way back there. The inspectors, yes.
Yeah, it's in the news last night about Section 60, stop and search. And it's been in, the government's put it on the back burner, basically.
Yeah. They were going to reduce or cut out stop and search.
That's correct, yeah.
Is that true, David Aaronovitch? Do you think that the government's done that?
All the information I have is that there's a huge argument between the Home Secretary, Theresa May, and Number 10 about whether or not she wants to restrict stop and search, and Number 10 badly doesn't, because it sees it as quite an element in its ability to go out and say it's tough on crime. So that, certainly, and we get, I mean, not only is our relationships now between the business department and the Home Office incredibly bad, but the relations between the Home Office and Number 10 are incredibly bad.
OK. You sit up there on the left.
Well, my view is that although we need to kind of look at the police to solve their problems, we should stop kind of navel gazing. Because when you compare the police in this country to other parts of the world, I don't think we can fault them. You see, they do a good job. As a black man, I've been subject to sort of well, stop and search. I used to live in Suffolk, and when I came to London, in a week, I was stopped 3 occasions by the police. And I could not believe it, that well, this could happen. But in the end, I have to put that aside and to kind of decide that, look, the police are like just you and I. everybody makes mistakes. And when they make mistakes, it should be dealt with and move on. Otherwise,
you don't think there's a policy of stopping black people as opposed to white people?
Well, I think
searching them.
I think there is, but also white people. Well, it's lots of white people are also stopped, but nobody reports it. Okay. So I think we should stop navel gazing.
Can I just say one thing? To generalise is fine. The police, Rachel's right, have made huge progress. But if you're the one person, if you're the person stopped on the street unjustifiably again and again and again, that is unacceptable. And we have to deal with the stop and search problem because some communities get a really bad deal.
Alexander, what do you think? You've lived here many years?
Yes, yes.
What do you think of the policing here?
Well, I think the police here is great compared to some countries. Well, we've seen, you know, the Ukrainian police, and I know about the Russian police as well. And to be honest with you, I think they're trying very hard to be inclusive. And maybe if they don't have the numbers, you know, of black policemen or Asian policemen, but they're moving there. They're not saying, no, we're going to change. So I have faith in the British police.
Okay. The woman there in the middle.
Like I said, we need to see change. We need to see what we want to believe in as a nation, as a country. We need to see, when you grow up, when the media portrays things, when our teachers, the policemen, the politicians, we need to see ethnic minorities. We need to see difference. If we just see, I'm sorry to say, just conservative white people up there, we're not going to have belief in anything. I'm not saying it about white people, I'm saying conservative and people who've come out of private schools. There's no one there with a bit of colour. Not talking about skin colour, I'm talking about colour to the plate, bringing something passionate, bringing something that we can look up to, rather than dryness.
And you said in the fourth row from the back, yes. You, sir.
I personally, I wouldn't. I've been in London. I've literally, I've grown up in London, but I don't trust the police. Recently, when we was in the tuition fees strikes, we was rounded up with my friends who were white, and we was taken to Euston Station. For about 3 hours was there, and then we were let go. And then they just told us to sign here, and then we were left go. And my white friends didn't leave with nothing, not even a warning, but I left with a caution of doing nothing. Literally, I'm trying to run a CRB for a job, and then it comes up on enhanced CRB. I realized that I do have a caution, which I don't know about. No one told me at the Euston Station that we're giving you a caution. So literally, this is gonna live with me for the next 5 years. Yet it's a mistake of the police. So how do you expect me to trust the police when they can do that to me and they can't do it to my white friends whom I went with uni?
Amanda Patel.
When Joel first asked that question, the first thing I was struck by is that you are a beautiful young black man, as Stephen Lawrence was before he was stabbed to death in the street. And he was not just let down by the Met. It wasn't just the police who lied. Not all of them. I can see that most of them are great, but there was an element that lied, that covered up, that covered each other's backs. They were not just let down by the police, they were also let down by the politicians. And it was my newspaper, the Daily Mail, who ran a non-stop campaign against all fashion, against all popularity, against the reader. You know, it wasn't like putting Madeleine McCann on the front page of the paper. This was not a groundswell campaign. But my editor, Paul Dacre, felt so passionately that this was so wrong that he campaigned for 2
Right,
decades.
that's the plug for the Daily Mail. Let's have the answer to the question.
It is actually really important.
I think that's well known.
What we have now...
It's been said often. What about the question that Joel asked?
Now? Is it question time?
No, it's question time where you answer the question that Joel asked. Which is... Much as we know, the Mail is a much-loved paper and all of that, can the Met ever be trusted when it comes to dealing with ethnic minorities? That was the question.
And I think that I answered that, but the question now is...
Right, we go on to somebody else.
No, can I just finish? The simple point is that that we talk about the fact that everything has changed and things have got better, but actually the whole case with Andrew Mitchell and Plebgate shows that the police still, there's an element of corruption and they cover each other's backs, and that is very, very worrying.
Michael Heseltine.
Well, the particular story that we're addressing is a scandal. And I think the government has reacted speedily and correctly in responding to what has shocked huge numbers of people. To pick on individuals for any reason, whether they be of a different race or a different class or a different infirmity, is intolerable. And the law is clear. Now, your specific question is, can people trust the Met in the circumstances? I think the truth is, for the most people, yes. But for very large numbers of a minority, no.
To be trusted by everyone, not for...
Yeah, but life isn't like that. You never get 100% opinion on one issue. So I think what I'm trying to say is that there is a balance in the answer. Many people will feel, I think, as you do, you never can trust them. But a lot of people will say, yes, they're doing their duty. So it's a mixed answer. Now, from your point of view, and I'm very sympathetic to the point of your question, I think it was either Rachel or Simon said that the police don't look like London. The electorate of London is now 50% ethnic. But virtually nothing in London, except the electorate, looks 50% ethnic. And so the issue is about absorbing a vast number of new people who've come to this country over the last 50 years and seeing them represented at every level of society. And one of the particular problems in the case of the police is it's very difficult to recruit people from some of the ethnic groups.
Due to lack of trust.
Exactly. But, OK, let's accept that point. Let's assume there is a lack of trust. Now, how does the Met overcome... No, how does the Met overcome that if they try to recruit people in order to build the trust, but the recruits don't come?
Well, the recruitment system's obviously not fair then, is it? You're honestly telling me that these people aren't applying for these jobs?
I'm sorry, but
I find that very hard to believe. I feel that the people
you may find it hard to believe...
Can I just say somebody who was attacked in Barking just 2 weeks ago is a consequence of sheer and utter incompetence by the police here? I ran and chased my attacker to the police station myself. That police station was closed on a Sunday afternoon and no one was there to rescue me. But a 30-year-old Muslim girl who came to my rescue to defend me.
You may find it hard to believe, but it is difficult to attract certain groups of ethnic people.
But my point is that the people that you've got in power at the moment aren't doing the job correctly. The people, like I saying, they're the conservative white people, they're not doing the job properly. So...
OK, you sat at the back there in the checked shirt.
Thank you. I think we have to put it in context. We're talking about corruption in the police service. The Metropolitan Police has 35,000 police officers. We're talking about a handful of incidents here over a number of years.
Yeah. OK. All right. Time is against us. I'm going to move on to another question. This is a question we had, I think, more questions about, apart from Ukraine, than anything else this evening. And it's from... This one is from Pam Dumbleton, please. Pam Dumbleton.
Isn't it time the government listened to the people about the effect immigration is having in changing our communities?
Just in what way do you think the government isn't listening?
The government haven't got a clue. David Cameron has never been to Barking. If he came, they'd be warned in advance and everything would be brushed up. The government need to come and walk through our town and just see how we now live. Go back 12 years, it was totally different. Now, we are the complete minority there, and it's just like the most terrible place on earth to live at the moment.
Amanda Patel.
I did a little bit of research about Barking before I came here, and evidently you've had a 30% drop in the Indigenous population and a 200% increase in immigration. Yeah. And look, I think I'm probably the only one on the panel that is an immigrant. I came from Australia 28 years ago with a backpack. I love this country. I'm really glad to be able to live here. But I never came here expecting that I would be able to get a house, send child benefit back home, use the welfare system. I always thought that it was a privilege to be here. And I do not understand when we have the kind of social tensions we have here with schools which are just overflowing now. You've got more children of school age in this area proportion of population than anywhere else in the country. And that's because you have lots of people coming in, many of whom want to work really hard and want to contribute, but the government is not taking account of the pressure it puts. And I just think, you know...
How does it do that? How should it do
that?
Well,
you know, David, I think it's a huge problem. What David Cameron has suggested recently...
Say that? Sorry, hold on. Listen to the indigenous people here, the people that have been here all their lives, all their families have been here.
David Cameron did suggest that that we had a ban, so if someone was coming in, they had to work for 3 months and pay tax before they were able to use the benefits. I would say 10 years. I would say make it a bigger barrier, make people contribute.
All right.
That's what I would say.
Make your point, sir, again. What was it?
1 in 7 new businesses are set up by immigrants, yeah?
To employ immigrants. Yeah.
They've all been given money. Everything's been thrown at the immigrants. But listen...
No, I don't...
David Aaronovitch. Can I finish then? Listen, I've applied for 100 jobs in the railway. 100 jobs. I don't even get an interview no more. In the old days, at least you get a letter. At least you get a rejection letter. I don't even get that. 100 jobs. But these immigrants, they get all their tickets paid for. They get all their jobs. I'm homeless. I've got nowhere to live. I have to go down today and see an immigrant telling me that well, that's the truth. Well, that's the truth. I went down to John Smith's house today, and an immigrant tells me that I cannot live here. I cannot get nowhere to live.
All right. David Aaronovitch. Hang on. All right, let's hear... OK, we get your point.
You are... And we get nothing.
Sir, you're blaming...
I'm not blaming immigrants at all.
No, you're blaming the wrong people.
I'm not...
You're blaming...
I'm just stating the facts.
Can I just say something,
case.
sir? No. You're stating a perception of the facts of the case. And I can
for me personally, and for many people like me.
Yeah, OK, you made your point. Let him answer.
I know, but just because you perceive something doesn't make it true.
It's true for me.
No. There isn't anything that
we've been told.
No, hold on. No, please.
We're not all racist.
Hang on, sir.
Hang on. Be fair. But what about indigenous people here as well?
I think we've heard your point. The idea is the panel should be able to answer.
No one has so far accused anybody of being racist. But the things that you've said were exactly what was said about my grandparents when they came over to the Jewish East End in the early 1900s. Exactly the same things. They said precisely the same things. We can't walk through our streets because they're not ours anymore. Why is a street not yours? Because some of the faces in it are black. Why can't you be in a street that has white and black?
All right, you can answer this.
English on the streets.
No, hold on. Actually,
he didn't actually say... David,
most immigrants, of course...
He didn't say anything about black.
He didn't mention black people. He just said immigrants.
Do you really think that?
Is it?
Well, I've got nowhere to live. I need to go and find somewhere to live.
All right.
Yeah, I will. Tonight.
OK. You sir at the very back there. Thank you very much. You sir at the back.
Can I say, I work round the corner in a school that is a fantastically assimilated and cohesive community. I do not recognise the barking that we're hearing from the front row. I'm a bit worried. I'm a bit, not disgusted, but a bit concerned that the BBC Tonight selected that question from the lady at the front there just to build up this sort of debate. But
hang on. You may not have heard me say there were more questions on immigration in Well, wait a minute. Be fair. More questions on immigration in Barking than on any other subject apart from Ukraine.
I appreciate that.
So don't start attacking the programme for having selected this question. It was the audience's question.
What I'd really love the panel to comment on, though, is the supposed suppression today by the Tories of a report that said there was no link between immigration and unemployment. And I'd like
Michael Heseltine, you'd like to answer that.
The Conservative-led government has just published the report. So I don't know what you're using the word suppression about. What the report says is that actually there isn't anything like the linkage between immigration and unemployment as people perceived. That's what the report says, although there was an earlier report which indicated there was. And why I disagree with you is because I think it's the job of the BBC to allow questions of this sort to be asked.
Absolutely.
Because undoubtedly, this whole issue of immigration and the rate at which we can attract foreign people from overseas is absolutely fundamental to the political debate in this country. And if you actually look at the UK Isolationist Party, they call themselves UKIP, the whole appeal of UKIP is actually about immigration. And the resentments that we heard here, that's the UKIP question. And I think that the most impressive thing that's happened here tonight in Barking is the overwhelming reaction of the audience in resentment at this parody of what Barking is all about.
You sat there. Yes, in the blue shirt.
I think you're deluding yourself if you think there aren't these tensions.
Yes, there are.
But who's, especially in this area.
Yeah.
But I think maybe you're blaming the wrong people. If you're blaming each other sitting in this audience, if you're going to let people come here without any infrastructure and any planning to settle them in, then there's going to be tensions. And it's not just going to be white versus black or black versus Chinese. It's going to be everybody.
Rachel Reeves, you're applauding him. You agree?
I do agree with him. And look, David said that just because the gentleman at the front perceived something doesn't make it real. And he shouted back, but it's real for me. And he walked out of this room and people clapped, and you shouldn't have clapped when he walked out of this room, because for him, he is homeless, and he might be wrong in blaming some people in this room for that, but that's how he feels. And that is a situation that he's facing today. And we can't just say, you're wrong, and let him walk out, because he has to hear what other people have to say, and you have to hear what he has to say as well. But I do agree with this gentleman, because if we are going to let people come into this country, we've got to make sure that there is a level playing field. We've got to make sure that there are school places. We've got to make sure there are the homes for people to live in. And we've got to make sure as well that there are jobs for people, and we need to make sure as well that the labour market isn't rigged against people. So, you know, the situation where jobs are advertised overseas but they're not advertised in this country, for example.
And you believe that's happening?
It does happen, it does happen.
So you believe that immigration as a whole is being wrongly handled?
I do think that there are very real problems that we need to deal with. For example, jobs should be advertised in this country. The minimum wage should be properly enforced. Health and safety should be enforced. Private landlords who let out their houses to, you know, 10 people in a 2-3 bedroom homes, that should not be allowed. And we've got to understand the legitimate concerns of people who have lived here and their families have lived there all their lives. We also have to understand that people come to this country because they want to work hard, like David's family did, like you and your families of other people in this room did, and we've got to make it work for everybody, for all of us, because we have to live in this community together. We can't roll back the clock. We have to make it work, and we can only do that by working together.
This is the most arrogant hypocrisy I've ever listened to. This is a supporter of the Labour government that had over 200,000 people coming into this country as immigrants.
And there are 200,000 coming today,
and you actually did absolutely nothing about it. And you're now pretending you've got all these policies. What would you do? What would you actually do in government?
First of all, Michael...
No, what would you do?
Well, do you want to listen to me?
No, I do. I want you to answer the question. What would you do?
First of all, Michael, there are 200,000 people coming to this country today. That's what the numbers
Under the rules
showing.
that you created.
No, under the rules. You've been in government for 4 years.
Yeah,
Your government's been in power for 4 years.
What did you do?
Well, first of all, I've been in a parliament since 2010.
So it's your party's fault.
What I'm saying is we need rules to enforce these things. We need to ensure that the infrastructure is there, and we need to ensure that the jobs aren't just being advertised overseas. You know, no one's been named or shamed for not paying the national minimum wage. We need to ensure that those rules, that gangmasters can't exploit those rules. There are practical things we could do, but blaming each other, people blaming each other for the problems of this country, that's not the right way forward.
You say in the front here, and then I come to you, Alexander.
I think one of the problems is, in the past, when immigrants came in, it was in small numbers, and they gradually assimilated into the new community, and the new community accepted them. Here in Barking, it's been like an absolute invasion. You know, we were talking about what's happening in the Crimea earlier, you know, the threat of invasion there. Here in Barking, we seem to be living through it. I love the new foreign people, I get on with them, but I just don't know this borough. I feel a stranger in my own country.
Alexander. Alexander Nekrasov.
You know, from a point of view of a Russian who is living here, I tell you why you have that debate and why you're so heated about it is because it's been suppressed for so long. And the only reason why you have it now is because the elections are coming. UKIP is sort of, you know, making a fuss about this, and suddenly all the parties started to talk. But there was no reasonable debate on that issue about 4 years ago.
We had Enoch Powell in the 1960s saying all the same sort of things. It's not a new debate.
No, that's not. We had this debate. We had this debate back in 2010 with Gordon Brown and Gillian Down. We've been having nothing but the immigration debate for the last, it seems to me, last 10 years. And let me just do the thing closed away.
Are you saying it should be closed down?
No, I'm very much in favour of the debate, but I'm also in favour of saying that I'm actually pleased that Labour let all those immigrants come to Britain. People who are an immense... They say a terrifically good thing about this place as a country, and they contribute an enormous amount to this country. And if there are problems... And if there are problems of transition and services and so on, yes, we should solve those problems. But those kids we're talking about in those overflowing schools will be paying your kids' pensions.
All right. Simon Hughes. Simon Hughes, I'll come back. You asked the question. I'll come back to you after we've heard from Simon Hughes, and then I'll come to you.
Listen,
and then we'll pretty much
I represent the Old Kent Road, the Elephant and Castle. Very proud to do so. What you raise is a real issue. Yeah, I accept that for people born here, particularly for people whose families come from London for generations, they have seen a very large increase in people, quotes, not like them. I accept that completely, yeah? I do think, like Michael, that the last government had two significant failures for which they need to be held to account. One, they made an error in allowing the transition period which we could have had when Poland and countries joined the EU not to be applied. We were the only country in the EU that allowed that. So, of course, they came here.
So
and they were very lucky. Well, hang on, David.
That was a mistake.
Do you regret all those polls?
Of course I don't. But it was a mistake because the volume of people who came over that period, in my judgment, I said it at the time, I thought would cause a tension, which it did. Yeah. The other thing is that under Labour, the policing of our borders was hopeless. Hopeless. The UK BA, we had no system for checking anybody out, and we had a pretty lousy system for controlling our border. Now,
and what do you say to the lady here who asked the original question?
No,
before we come to the end of the programme.
I was responding to her question.
Yes.
So there is
but haven't the EU made all of this worse?
No, listen.
They've made us keep our borders open. Yes, they have. We need
let me ask you a question.
No, we need to police our own borders. We need to make our own decisions. We don't need the EU to run our country.
You could take that view. I disagree. I'll tell you why.
I know you do.
I'll tell you why. No, listen, I'll tell you why. We in the UK have retained our right to have passport border control, unlike other countries, and I support that, yeah? But this government, both parties in the government, are very clear that they are addressing this issue. We can't change the rules on the European Union because it's a free trade, free movement idea. And there are 2.5 million people who are British in other parts of the European Union because they chose to go there.
Simon, I'm going to have to... All right. I'm going to have to stop you. I'm going to have to stop you if I can. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our hour. I'm sorry to those of you who... Well, what can I do? We'll have another hour. I'm sorry, our hour is up. Next week, just next week, we're going to be in Nottingham. We'll have the Shadow Foreign Secretary Douglas Alexander there, and Nick Hewer, the star of The Apprentice, on the panel in Nottingham. Week after that, we're going to be in Warrington, which is the day after the budget. So either Nottingham or Warrington, if you want to come, the address is on the bottom of the screen there, the website, or you can call us on 0330 123 9988. If you're listening to this or have been on 5 Live, you can continue the debate. Question time, extra time follows immediately. But my thanks to our panel here and to all of you who came to Barking for this edition of Question Time. Until next Thursday, good night.
And more political discussion next on BBC One Northern Ireland with This Week.